All right. So picture this. You're like really, really needing to get your house clean. And like, who doesn't, right? You finally find yourself a total cleaning whiz, someone who's ready to tackle it all at a price you can both agree on. Everyone wins, right? Win-win. But then wham, the tax monster kind of rears its ugly head.
Yeah, and what we often forget is that taxes, they're not just about the government, grabbing revenue.
Right.
It's like when you drop a pebble in a pond. It's those ripple effects, those kind of unintended consequences that go way beyond just like shifting money around.
Yeah, that's what we're diving into today, the economics of taxation, specifically this whole idea of deadweight loss, which I know sounds a little intimidating at first. Trust me, it matters to all of us. So what is deadweight loss? Why should we care about it?
Okay, so in the simplest terms, deadweight loss is like those missed connections in a romantic comedy. Like the lost potential for something good because something is in the way.
Yeah.
That barrier, in this case, is a tax, and it basically shrinks the size of the market, and it's preventing those mutually beneficial deals.
Okay, I'm sensing a theme here. First, the cleaning, now rom-com, somebody get this podcast, a sponsorship deal. But in all seriousness, can you give us a real-world example?
Oh, totally. The textbook uses the example of Joe. He's a single dad who relies on those cleaning gigs to make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Jane, who's juggling a really demanding job, and she desperately needs a clean house. They finally agree on a price. Let's just say $100 that works for both of them. And then bam, a $50 tax on cleaning services.
Wow, that is a hefty tax.
It is, and that's where this whole deadweight loss thing comes in. You see, Jane, even though she really needs that help, she might balk at that higher price now that the tax is factored in.
Right.
And Joe is already stretching every dollar.
Yeah.
He can't afford to take home any less. So what happens? No clean house for Jane, no income for Joe.
Yeah.
That potential exchange, that win-win, it evaporates.
That makes sense. We've all been there, like, deciding against something because the price with tax just doesn't feel worth it anymore. But here's what I don't get. You're saying that even if the government doesn't collect a dime in taxes, because in this case, Joe and Jane don't make a deal, there's still this economic loss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That, my friend, is pure economic inefficiency, which is what economists call deadweight loss. The market, in this case, the potential exchange of cleaning services for money between Joe and Jane has shrunk. And everyone loses a little bit. You see why we're talking about this?
Absolutely. We often think about taxes as simply taking money from one group and giving it to another, but this whole idea of deadweight loss, these missed opportunities for those mutually beneficial exchanges, that's huge. But how do we know how much a tax will actually shrink a market? Like, is there a way to predict that?
That's where it gets even more interesting. We bump into this concept called elasticity.
Yeah.
Imagine you have a rubber band.
A rubber band. Okay, now I'm really curious.
Right. So you've got some markets that are like that pressy rubber band, you pull on it, or in this case, you raise the price with a tax, and the market stretches, meaning people adjust their buying habits pretty quickly. Economists call that elastic demand. Now imagine you're trying to stretch a piece of dry spaghetti.
Ooh, yeah, no, that's not stretching very far.
Exactly. That's what we call inelastic demand. Even with a big price hike, people are still going to buy roughly the same amount. It's like that with things people see as like necessities. They're less sensitive to those price changes. And this whole idea of elasticity, how much a market will stretch or snap under pressure, it applies to the supply side too.
So if I'm picturing this right, a tax on a good with really elastic demand, something people are pretty flexible about buying that could lead to a way bigger deadweight loss than a tax on something people see as essential.
You got it. And our textbook, Visual Figure 5, shows it really well. Depending on whether the supply and demand for a good are elastic or inelastic, that deadweight loss can be tiny, like a sliver of pie, or huge, like someone took a giant bite out of it.
This is making me think about that whole debate about taxing sugary drinks. The argument is by making them more expensive, people will buy less, leading to those better health outcomes. But isn't that assuming a pretty elastic demand for sugary drinks?
It is, and that's where it gets really interesting. If people are easily put off by a price hike, they might switch to water or other, healthier alternatives, and you would see that demand curve stretch. But if people are like attached to those sugary drinks, that demand might not budge very much. It's more like our dry spaghetti.
Right.
And the tax might not actually have the effect they're hoping for.
So figuring out how big that deadweight loss triangle is going to be, whether it's a sliver or a giant missing chunk, it all comes down to understanding how elastic, how flexible the market is for that particular good or service.
Exactly. The textbook actually has this question: would a tax on beer or milk cause a bigger economic ripple? It's like a little quick quiz for the econ whiz in all of us.
Well, I know I gotta have my morning coffee, so my guess is milk might fall into that inelastic category. But I bet people are a bit more flexible about their, you know, Friday night beer choices.
And that's exactly the kind of thinking economists use. Understanding which goods people are more likely to cut back on or find substitutes for if the price goes up is key to predicting those bigger deadweight loss triangles.
Okay, this is all making sense. But what about income taxes? I mean, that's a big one for most people, and it seems like those rates are always changing. Governments are constantly tinkering, trying to find that sweet spot. So how does this idea of deadweight loss of elasticity play into something as complex as income tax?
That's where things get really interesting. And we bump into this concept called the Laffer curve. You see, our next visual figure 6 is a bit like a roller coaster.
A roller coaster, huh? Okay, you've officially piqued my curiosity. Tell me more about this Laffer curve.
Well, just imagine this. As tax rates get higher and higher, the government should rake in more revenue, right? Like climbing up one of those slow click, 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 like roller coaster hills. But here's the thing. The Laffer curve suggests that if you just keep hiking up those rates, you eventually hit this peak, and then whoosh, down you go.
Wait, so you're saying at a certain point raising taxes could actually lead to less revenue for the government? That's kind of wild.
It really is a bit of an economic paradox, and you can probably guess what plays a starring role here, those elasticities we were talking about. You see the shape of that Laffer curve, how steep that climb is, how dramatic that drop is. It all hinges on how sensitive people are to changes in tax rates.
Okay, so let's talk income taxes. Seems like economists are always debating whether labor supply, how much people are actually willing to work, is elastic or inelastic.
You hit the nail on the head. That very debate is at the heart of a lot of arguments about taxes, about the size and role of government, really, about it all. Because if people are pretty much stuck working a certain amount, no matter their take-home pay, meaning labor supply is inelastic, then that Laffer curve might look more like a gentle hill, higher income taxes.
Yeah, but the deadweight loss, those discouraged workers, they're not as big of a deal. But if people do adjust their working hours, maybe they decide to retire early or take less demanding jobs, or even like the textbook mentions, they're tempted by that underground economy where things aren't taxed well, that changes things up quite a bit, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If people are really sensitive to changes in their take-home pay, meaning labor supply is more elastic, well, that Laffer curve could be a much steeper roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
Think about it, big income tax hikes. You might see fewer people working less economic activity and get this potentially even less revenue for the government in spite of those higher rates. It's that downward whoosh we were talking about.
This really highlights how complex designing a tax system is. It's not just about the numbers, it's about understanding how people behave, those sort of hidden incentives and trade-offs that make us react to policies in a certain way.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Every decision, every policy, it all comes with some kind of trade-off. And really, getting those economics, even those hidden costs like deadweight loss, well, it helps us make smarter choices as individuals, as voters, as people just trying to navigate this crazy world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So to everyone listening, next time you're hit with a price hike or you overhear a debate about tax policy, think back to this conversation. Think about those elasticities that Laffer curve and ask yourself, what are the potential hidden costs here? It just might change how you see things. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.